Healthful Awareness webinar. This is our November webinar, and our guest this evening is Joel Auerbach. Joel is a member of the National Association for Laser Therapy, the American Association for Laser Therapy, the American Counseling Association, and the American Society of Photobiologists. Joel is the owner of the Laser Therapy Center of Manalapan, and he's going to be talking to us this evening about smoking cessation with using the laser. And I just want to say, Joel came out to our office many times and worked with our patients, and we had really amazing results, Joel, right? We had hardcore 3-pack-a-day smokers
Right.
that were taking the therapy and leaving the office as non-smokers. And, you know, it was people that could never believe that they'd be able to quit smoking. So it was so successful, in fact, that all of our patients that wanted to quit smoking did. And so I can't say enough about this procedure. So Joel, welcome, and we're really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Lisa. It's nice to be here. So, you know, smoking is an interesting topic because, believe it or not, when you look at the overall issue here, the issue is really not that people smoke. The issue is, why do people smoke? Because smoking really is just a vehicle to a solution. And the problem for that solution is that people are addicted to nicotine. And everybody asks that question, you know, why do I continue smoking? Many of our clientele come in and they'll tell us stories, excuse me, for example, that they watch their parents die horrific deaths from COPD or lung cancer or emphysema, and they wonder why, you know, why they themselves are quitting smoking when they firsthand can see the horrible results of this. And the question is that, the question is why they smoke, but the answer is because smoking is not the issue. The answer is that nicotine is the issue. So what we want to do is we want to address the problem of nicotine. And if we make the nicotine issue go away, the smoking doesn't need to be there anymore. Like I said originally, the smoking really is just a vehicle. And what that vehicle is delivering is it's delivering nicotine to your body. So nicotine is, in every sense, an addiction. And an addiction comes about when different situations happen in life, but an addiction mainly comes about when our brain's chemistry gets altered a tiny bit. And what happens is our brain stimulus changes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. But the most important thing that people need to remember is that nicotine is not that quote unquote habit or the hand to mouth thing. That's all part of it. But the real issue is that nicotine is truly an addiction. And up until this point, there really hasn't been any way of taking care of the addiction. We've tried products like the patch and the gums and the lozenges, all that. And in the industry, those are called nicotine replacement therapies. And what nicotine replacement therapies do is try to give your body a different way of getting nicotine. But since nicotine is the problem, and we're still giving the body nicotine, we're really not solving the problem. So the next attempt to try to fix that was, in the medical community, was to use drugs, to use some kind of a drug that would help us get past that. And there's been a lot of them on the market. Some are relatively new, a few years old. Some have been around for decades. Many years ago, the most common drug was a drug called Zyban. And Zyban was prescribed as a smoking cessation drug. And like most good inventions that we've come across, it too came across by accident. And Zyban was actually, or is actually, another name, or goes by another name, and that's Wellbutrin. And Wellbutrin is described by a physician if the patient complains that they're a little down and out, a little bit of anxiety, so on. So they'll give them the drug Wellbutrin. And what Wellbutrin does is it helps your brain release more serotonin and dopamine, which tends to up your mood a little bit. Well, when Wellbutrin was originally being tested, many years ago, when smoking was a very accepted thing by society, one of the, if you will, side effects of Wellbutrin was that people said, I don't really feel like I have to smoke anymore. So like all good companies, they found a little angle and said, hey, this is genius. Why don't we market it as an anti-drug or an anti-smoking medication? And that's what they did. So they changed the name, or they added another product, and they gave that product's name Zyban. And of course, because smoking was an elected thing at the time, most insurance companies, and they still don't, pay for you to quit smoking. Um, it was a product that worked for the time, but insurance wasn't wasn't paying for it, and so on. So what a lot of doctors would do was, if they had a patient that they wanted to quit smoking, they would actually prescribe Wellbutrin, which was the exact same drug. So anyone who was on Wellbutrin was also, if you will, on Zyban, and vice versa. The problem with that drug is that it actually, as I indicated before, it tells your brain to release more serotonin and dopamine. Excuse me. And if your dopamine and serotonin levels are normal, now we're using a medication to increase it, and then we get other types of side effects. And the main side effect of Wellbutrin and Zyban was that people tended to get angry. So then it got to a point where someone would say, well, you're either smoking or you're angry. And, most husbands and wives would agree that they'd rather smoke than be angry at each other.
Right.
So people kept smoking. So although it was a good attempt, it really didn't do very much. And then a number of years back, not too many, but a drug called Chantix came on the market. And Chantix was actually designed as a smoking cessation drug, and it's very effective. It works well for most people. The problem with Chantix is that its side effects are very dramatic. So dramatic that in some cases, it's actually what's called contraindicated, which means that this drug will have a negative effect on what it's trying to do. So much so that in particular industries, for example, if you're in the transportation industry, which means if you're a pilot, and not necessarily a commercial pilot, but even if you have your own private pilot's license, or you drive a bus or a train or whatever, by law you cannot take Chantix. So the result of that law came about because of some of the side effects that were associated with it. The ones that we hear about most are people having horrible, very psychotic, if you will, based dreams. Sadly, there's been a very high suicide rate. So one of the things where Chantix is not recommended is if anyone's on drugs like Wellbutrin, oddly enough, for anxiety and so on. So it does help. It does take away the craving, if you will, and help you get rid of the need to smoke. But it does it sort of at a cost, and in some cases that cost is a little too high. And then lately, of course, the latest and greatest is these e-cigarettes, and the e-cigarette came about as just a play on the fact that people need to think they have to see vapor coming out of their mouth. It's an interesting concept, but quite honestly, I have a lot of friends, and I don't know of any of them that want to move to Alaska so they can see vapor coming out of their mouth from the cold every day of the year. I mean, that first nice cool morning in October, it's pretty cool, and after that, it gets old real quick.
Yeah.
So although the e-cigarette, like everything else, has its market, it really doesn't change the problem. So what we need to do is we really need to get to the problem. And the problem is nicotine. And as I started to indicate before, nicotine changes your brain's stimulus. Now, your brain releases numerous neurological chemicals all day, all night. We don't know it, we don't feel it, and honestly, we just don't care. And when we start to care is when our brain stops releasing these stimuluses. But when we put a cigarette in our mouth, what happens is our brain fortunately recognizes the danger of nicotine. We do know that 1 ounce of nicotine will kill a full-grown elephant in 20 minutes from a drug overdose.
Wow.
An ounce of nicotine will kill a group of people in a small room almost instantly. Fortunately, your brain recognizes that, and it instantly releases another neurological chemical, which we haven't talked about before, called endorphin. And endorphin is released for a lot of reasons, but one of those reasons is it's released to protect our organs. So our brain recognizes the danger of nicotine. Instantly, it releases endorphin. And endorphin is a drug that actually makes us, not only does it protect our organs, it also sends signals to our body to monitor our blood sugar levels. And of course, very uncontrolled blood sugar levels lead to death. So that's an important feature of endorphin. Endorphin also gives us what athletes call a runner's high. And what actually happens with endorphin is it's a little bit of a weird concept, but it kind of turns off your brain for about 15, 20, 30 seconds. Now, your brain doesn't literally shut off, but your brain just kind of doesn't pay attention to everything. So when a smoker takes that first drag of a cigarette, all of a sudden their whole world becomes peaceful and calm and everything else.
Mm.
And most people will say the reason I smoke is it calms me down. But actually, what has happened was your brain determined that there's a big danger here with this nicotine. It kind of said to you, let's block everything in your world out for a few seconds and figure out, is are you okay? Are you doing all right? And your brain waits for a response. And of course, your response is that you're going to continue to smoke. So your brain assumes you're doing all right and life goes on. And oddly enough, the same thing happens with an athlete. You're on a treadmill, for example, for 30, 40 minutes. Your blood pressure's been up as a result of your running. Your heart rate obviously is up. So your brain says, you know what, for the last half hour, 40 minutes or so, your vitals have been a little bit high. Are you okay? So your brain kind of gives you that okay. It kind of turns off the world around you, and you're on that treadmill, and your knees are killing you, and you can't breathe, and you might not even like exercising, but all of a sudden, out of the blue, you feel like singing a song. You feel great. So that's endorphin, and the athlete, oddly enough, the athlete, if you ask them how you feel when the endorphin is released, they'll tell you invigorated, alive, pumped, whatever. And with the exact same endorphin, if you ask a smoker, they're going to say calm, relaxed, and you'll never hear calm or relaxed out of the athlete because they're running. So, but it's that same effect. So what's happened is the stimulus has changed, and the stimulus changed from what it originally was, and what the original stimulus to release endorphin was actually your body. Remember, no one's born a smoker. And no one has cravings before they've ever had a first cigarette. So something happened. So what happened was the nicotine forced the brain to release endorphin. And then as we continue to smoke, most people start at 12 or 13 years old, whatever. And then, we have 1 pack, 2 packs. And then your brain actually needs to make a decision. And that is your brain going to release endorphin when there's nicotine present, or is it going to release endorphin when it always did? And that stimulus came from your body. So your body would send this signal, this stimulus, if you will, to your brain to release many chemicals. In this case, we're talking about endorphin. And your brain would release the endorphin. When you introduce nicotine, what happened was you forced your brain to use a different stimulus. And what ends up resulting is that your brain changes its stimulus. So the stimulus now used to be the body, and now you become addicted to nicotine. And the addiction is that your brain stimulus has now changed to nicotine. Now, if you remember, endorphin does a lot of things, and one of them was to monitor blood sugar levels. And now, if the only time your brain is releasing endorphin is when you're smoking, and your body needs these vital signals, you really don't have a choice. You have to smoke. So there's the actual addiction of nicotine. Any chemical, any substance, whether it's cigarettes, or tobacco, I should say, or any kind of product containing nicotine, or alcohol, or any opium-based drug, all these things will tell your brain stimulus to be modified. And that's what makes all these different products an addictive product, is that they've changed your brain stimulus. So now what people need to understand is that they're smoking because not they have a habit and they have to put their hand to their mouth, but they're smoking because they have to satisfy their brain stimulus. So that's the real danger of any addiction. And then it's obviously the danger of nicotine. What most people don't realize is that nicotine is the most addictive drug in the world. It's more addictive than heroin. It's more addictive than cocaine. And Unfortunately, the only reason that nicotine is even legal is because it does provide a huge tax revenue to the federal government, which makes over $100 million every day
Mm.
just on taxes from cigarettes. And of course, all the state governments. There's 3 or 4 states whose entire economy is based on the growing of tobacco products. So it's not going anywhere.
Wow.
And the other problem with cigarettes per se is that the chemicals that are added to cigarettes, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, actually make the cigarette, or I should say the tobacco, 200 times more addictive as a cigarette than as a plant. And that too, of course, creates other situations. And in order to make the chemicals more addictive, what they need to do is they need to reformulate them. The government does regulate the amount of nicotine that can go into a cigarette because we now know how deadly nicotine is. So they do regulate it, but they add a lot of chemicals, and the chemicals, of course, make it more addictive. Bug spray, the main ingredient of bug spray happens to be nicotine, and not very many bugs walk away from bug spray.
Mm.
And as I said before, 1 ounce of nicotine will kill a full grown elephant in about 20 minutes. So, other truths that people don't realize about nicotine, because most people assume it calms them down. In actuality, it is a stimulant as a drug. And when it falls into that category of a stimulant, it automatically raises your heart rate, raises your blood pressure. And the last thing it does is calm you down. But what it does do, because it creates that dangerous situation, and as I indicated before, it kind of, in essence, turns your body off or your brain off. People have that feeling that they're calm when they're really not calm. So it does kind of play a lot of havoc with how we feel physically and how we feel mentally. There's really no advantage to smoking. Every organ in your body is negatively affected by it. And of course, once our brain stimulus changes and we have this addiction, we can't cure addictions. We have them our whole lives. Um, as I said before, most addictions are the same. Alcoholics Anonymous has a great expression when it comes to addictions, and that is that one is too many and 1,000 is not enough, and
Mm.
that goes for any addiction. Um, so once you're addicted, you don't really have that choice. Your brain stimulus has changed in order for your body, as odd as it sounds, as in order for your body to function normally, you really have to smoke. Most people say well, most people will tell us that they have friends that are quote unquote social smokers. They tell their friends that, but when they come in our office, they tell us they're actually smoking a couple of cigarettes a day or a couple of packs a day, not a couple a day, and so on. So you can't be a social smoker and be addicted to nicotine. The two just do not work together. So, as far as the solution is concerned, well, one thing, we can't reverse that stimulus by itself. In order to reverse the stimulus, to get your brain to act the way it did when you were a non-smoker, when you were first born, and so on, there's things we have to do. And the one thing we have to do is we have to take away the nicotine. So the solution is to completely remove nicotine from the body. And what it comes down to is, how are we willing to do that? And most people say that they're not going to remove nicotine from their body because they get this thing that they call cravings. And the thought, and it makes sense, I mean, it's common sense, is that a craving is your body needing nicotine. But the truth is, a craving is actually your body needing this neurological chemical we're talking about, endorphin. Remember, you didn't have cravings before you started smoking. So what happened was the brain stimulus changed. But the body, which always sent the stimulus to the brain, never stopped asking the brain to release endorphin. The brain and the body just were like two buddies, and they got into an argument, and the brain refused to release endorphin. So when the body sent a signal to the brain to release endorphin and the brain refused, the body got a little bit more aggressive. Just like when we're hungry, we feel a little hungry, then we feel a lot hungry.
Mhm.
So what happens is the body and the brain get into this little bit of a heated argument, and we literally start to feel it. And most people realize when they first started smoking that they feel a little weird. They're not really sure what it is, but if they put a cigarette in their mouth, what happens is that feeling goes away, and common sense kicks in, and that says, well, that was a stimulus or a craving. That was my body saying, I need nicotine. But it was actually your body saying that it needs endorphin, and the nicotine has now forced the release of endorphin, because when you put that cigarette in your mouth, you've actually given your brain the stimulus it needs. So that's why when we smoke, our craving, if you will, goes away. The same thing when we use the patch, the gums, the lozenges, anything with nicotine in it, doesn't matter. The craving goes away, because the craving is your body needing endorphin, but the stimulus is not there. The nicotine is the stimulus. So once we introduce nicotine, then of course that new stimulus is there. So the real question is, how does laser therapy handle cravings? Laser therapy is not new. It's been around for 40 years, but the methodology of laser therapy has been around for 5,000 years. It's actually based on principles of acupuncture. And the Chinese figured out many, many years ago that when you stimulate a nerve ending, which is very easy to do, when you shake someone's hand, you stimulate nerve endings in their hand. Whenever you stimulate a nerve ending, it always sends a signal to the brain. In the case of shaking someone's hand, you feel the pressure, they feel the pressure, and so on. So all that knowledge, that feeling, all that are actions that go on in the brain. So when you stimulate a nerve ending, you send a signal to the brain. And what happens with laser therapy is, as based on acupuncture, they use a needle to stimulate nerve endings. With laser therapy, we use a light. So we use the technology of a laser. We touch points that will stimulate nerve endings, and those nerve endings, excuse me, will tell your brain to do different things. Because of the very particular nerve endings that we're stimulating, which we're actually doing is we're creating a stimulus in the brain, and what that stimulus is doing is it's telling your brain to release endorphin. So the endorphin release, of course, is what the craving is. A craving is your body needing endorphin. So what the laser's doing is the same thing. And what we do is we use this, what's called a cold laser. It has nothing to do with temperature. It's just a different classification of a laser, but a cold laser doesn't burn tissue and so on. We have a lot of women ask, like, can we do hair removal and things like that? And the answer is no, we can't. Our laser, I mean, we can try, but you will not be happy with the results when you look in a mirror. So what the laser does is it just acts, if you will, internally. It stimulates nerve endings in the brain. And most of the nerve endings in your body, oddly enough, go to your feet and to your ears. So the ear is a great place to do laser therapy. And that's what we do. We use this laser. And as you can see on the slide, there's a picture of what the laser itself looks like. Um, it's kind of like an extra large pen, if you will, to give you an idea of size. It is completely painless. As you can tell, it's non-invasive and so on. And what the laser does is it stimulates these nerve endings. And how we know where the nerve endings are, well, the Chinese, they figured that out for us a long time ago. But what's interesting to know is if you take a picture of a baby in a fetal position and you turn it upside down, it's actually the exact shape of an ear. And if you look at the body of a baby, for example, the very bottom of it, that's the head. That's where all the acupuncture points would be for the head. And the baby's rear end, of course, is on the top, and all the acupuncture's there, and so on. So it does create an interesting type of a way of treating smoking. So what the laser does is it just stimulates the nerve ending. The nerve ending sends a signal to the brain, and it's telling the brain to just release endorphin. Now, it knows endorphin because of the particular points we're touching. And this release of endorphin is going to last for about 2 months. And we now know that a craving is not our body saying, I want nicotine. A craving is our body saying, I need endorphin. So an easy way to think about laser therapy is it kind of gives you about 2 months of endorphin. So what happens is for 2 months, there is no withdrawal symptom, because we know that a withdrawal symptom is a result of your body not getting enough endorphin. So with 2 months of endorphin, you have no withdrawal symptoms. With no withdrawal symptoms, you also don't have cravings. So the therapy itself automatically eliminates the need for any kind of nicotine therapy, and you will not have cravings, and you will not have any withdrawal symptoms. And those are the two reasons why most people will not quit smoking. They might try for a day or two, and then they get into a feeling of anxiety and everything else as a result of the craving and the withdrawal symptom, and they decide this is too much, I really can't handle it, and they go back to smoking again. So, with the therapy, of course, it helps a lot because it takes away that craving and it takes away that withdrawal symptom. And that's what makes it so effective.
Yeah.
Okay. So, the thing is that we just can't rely on the therapy alone. We need to do a few other things. We need to drink a lot of water, because not only does the tobacco company do a great job at manufacturing cigarettes, but they do even a better job of making the cigarettes more addictive.
Mm.
Um, as I said before, cigarettes are about 200 times more addictive as a cigarette than as a tobacco product. And the reason why is because there's so many chemicals added to the cigarettes. There's about 7,000 chemicals added to each cigarette. Hundreds of those chemicals are very toxic to our body, and hundreds of those chemicals cause cancer. So not only is the nicotine bad enough for us, but the chemical companies are allowed to add these other things to the cigarette to make the product even more. So it makes it very difficult for people to quit smoking. And what the therapy is going to do, of course, is it's going to allow you to do that by keeping away that withdrawal symptom and that craving. But in order for the therapy to be effective, you also need to get all of the chemicals out of your body. And that's very important to do that. So, what we tell people is it's important that in order to um, get rid of all these chemicals, they need to make sure that they detox their body. They use lots of water or drink lots of water to get the chemicals out of their system. The other thing people worry about is coffee. Coffee, like nicotine, or caffeine, like nicotine, is a stimulant. So we tell people for a few days after the therapy to watch their stimulants, their coffee, and so on. And of course, there's a very, very strong association of drinking alcohol and smoking. So we tell people just to be a little cautious. Don't drink to the point where you get that perspective where you say, I don't care, and you put a cigarette in your mouth. So basically, we just tell our clientele, make sure that they keep themselves out of harm's way. It's important to do that. And finally, it's just important to remember that unfortunately we can't cure addictions. So um, the most important thing people have to remember is that they just can't have one. They need to realize that there's no such thing as a social smoker, and that they have to recognize the fact that when they're done, they have to be done. We tell them kind of think of themselves as being on probation, and that they can never use a nicotine product again. And it would be the exact same thing if they were using an opium-based drug, heroin, cocaine. Even, unfortunately, hospitals and doctors are very, very careful about prescribing painkillers and so on, because of the result of an addiction. So, the medical community is very, very apprised and very careful um, to make sure that their patients are, getting the best possible care without doing more harm to them. So, we tell people, kind of think of yourself that you have to be on probation and that you can never use that nicotine product again. So really, that's the whole story. As far as the company's concerned, we have been in business for about 12 years. Um, we do get most of our business from referrals, which, to us is a great thing because it's, showing our clientele that what we're doing is working and we're helping other people. So to kind of summarize everything, the laser will take away the craving. It'll take away the withdrawal symptom. It's just important to drink a lot of fluids and to remember that you just don't have that luxury of being a social smoker. And just one final thing for people who think that they have a habit and they can't quit habits. Most people who put on the patch or the gum, or they chew the gum or they use the lozenges, they don't walk around putting their hand to their mouth pretending they're smoking. Most of their friends would think they're crazy. So the whole hand to mouth thing isn't really all that, if you will, it was marketed to be. And unfortunately, that marketing is such a good campaign that it's the main reason why people put on weight when they quit smoking, is they think they have to substitute a cigarette for something else.
Right.
And they really don't.
Yeah. Joel, you there? It seems like we've lost the connection with Joel. I did have some questions that I wanted to ask him, and just kind of a review. I may try to get him back on the line and add that to this webinar. But you see the slide here for the Center for Laser Therapy. Give Joel a call, set up your appointment today. And as I said in the beginning of the webinar, we had great success for people who really were motivated to finally quit the smoking habit, and it was just extremely successful. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to try to get back to Joel and maybe get some of the questions answered. I love that they're doing this and that it's non-invasive, it's not dangerous, you're not using medications where there are dangerous side effects. We saw that he said that they are putting 7,000 chemicals in a cigarette, and we have to ask ourselves, wow, why would we want to be subjecting ourselves to that? But I understand it's a very hard addiction to stop. With Joel's help, I think it sounds definitely possible to do without the cravings and side effects. And as I said, I witnessed it firsthand. So thank you, Joel, for sharing this. I'm sorry you can't hear this or be here for the ending part. This webinar will be archived on our website along with the other archives. This will be our November webinar. The PowerPoint will also be archived. You have Joel's information if you want to get in touch with him. Again, it's 877-808-7848. So thank you, Joel. And I just want to give a little intro for next month's webinar speaker. The webinar will be on December 16th. Remember, that's the third week of December, not the fourth week, because that'll take us into Christmas. Our speaker, which kind of is a nice follow-up to Joel, will be Meg Deek. She's a licensed professional counselor, educator, and workshop leader who has explored pathways to emotional well-being, as well as the holistic impact of vibration, energy, sound, and music for over 30 years. Much of her practice centers on working with motivated teens and adults wanting to become more calm, focused, productive, and happy. Fear, worry, sadness, guilt, and anger all contribute to what seems to be an epidemic of anxiety and depression. The numbers are staggering. The number of Americans taking antidepressants and anxiety affects over 40 million people. That's 18% of the entire population. Unfortunately, a lot of people with these issues will turn to drugs or alcohol to self-medicate their unsettling feelings. Meg's going to talk to us about the many natural techniques and remedies that a person suffering from anxiety and depression can utilize, and she will offer or explain how the brain reacts to stress, trauma, and negative thoughts, and will offer practical solutions to assist in dealing with these issues. So I think, as I said before, I think December is a great time for this. Many people suffering from depression. It seems to be exacerbated during the holidays with the stress of it and the all that goes along with our holiday season. So we hope you'll join us for that. Again, thank you, Joel, for your great presentation, and thank you all. We hope you enjoy the information.